You lack adaptability for contemporary military operations. That was Lieutenant Colonel Martin Rusk's reaction when I, John Mitchell, age 35 with 12 years of military logistics experience, presented him with comprehensive documentation showing $4.3 million in unaccounted equipment. The air conditioning unit droned steadily in his Camp Lemonnier office in Djibouti. Beyond the windows, African heat waves distorted the runway where cargo aircraft continuously loaded and offloaded materials destined for Horn of Africa missions. Inside, Rusk reclined casually as though I'd merely reported the daily weather conditions. Adaptable military personnel recognize essential operational compromises, he stated, avoiding eye contact with the detailed spreadsheets I'd compiled over 3 intensive weeks. I maintained a neutral expression. 12 years of Army experience teaches you the appropriate moments for speaking versus remaining silent. This situation demanded silence. However, something unsettling formed in my gut as I observed him casually dismissing months of missing night vision devices, secure communication equipment, and spare components that had disappeared from our records without justification. "Is there anything else, Sergeant Mitchell?" "No, sir." "You're dismissed." I rendered a salute, pivoted, and departed. My footsteps resonated through the hallway passing the supply departments where I'd dedicated 6 months tracking every piece of equipment moving through our installation. Each step seemed more burdensome than the previous. Returning to the quartermaster's workspace, I positioned myself at my workstation and gazed at the monitor. The data was indisputable. Every missing piece had been processed using Rusk's authorization credentials. Every inconsistency traced to identical patterns, equipment marked as relocated or combat casualties that never departed the perimeter, never experienced engagement, never sustained damage. Specialist Rodriguez passed by carrying requisition paperwork. "Working overtime again, Sergeant?" "Just completing some documentation." She acknowledged and continued walking. "Excellent soldier." She reminded me of my younger self upon initial enlistment, when I believed following regulations held meaning, when I trusted the system protected those who performed their duties correctly. I accessed the classified messaging portal on my computer. The cursor blinked in the blank message window. My fingers remained positioned above the keyboard. Outside, a convoy rumbled past the window, departing for another supply mission. Identical trucks I'd loaded with equipment that would mysteriously vanish from manifests before reaching destinations. Same drivers who trusted their transported equipment would reach the soldiers requiring it. I began composing. The Criminal Investigation Division required knowledge of my discoveries. Not from desire to destroy Rusk's career, but because field soldiers deserved superior supply chains and reliable equipment that could preserve their lives. What I hadn't realized was that Rusk had already determined I represented a problem requiring resolution. I enlisted immediately after high school graduation in Billings, Montana. My father worked in construction while my mother taught elementary students. Neither understood my military aspirations, but they provided support regardless. "Simply perform your best," my mother advised when I departed for basic training. That's all anyone can expect. Performing my best eventually meant becoming the person everyone contacted when supplies disappeared or documentation didn't reconcile. I possessed natural ability for recognizing patterns others overlooked, for tracking equipment through military bureaucratic complexities. Following my initial Afghanistan deployment, my commanding officer recommended logistics specialization. "You demonstrate exceptional aptitude for this work, Mitchell," he stated. "The Army requires soldiers capable of maintaining accountability." Throughout subsequent years, I served in Iraq, Syria, and currently East Africa. I'd managed forward operating base supply chains, tracked millions in equipment value, and established a reputation for precision. Fellow logistics officers labeled me regulation-focused. However, this wasn't about inflexible thinking, it concerned accountability. When soldiers required ammunition, medical supplies, or communication equipment, errors weren't acceptable. Lieutenant Colonel Rusk assumed command of our logistics division 3 months prior. He transferred from Pentagon administrative duties. He appeared polished, politically astute, the type of officer who participated in budget discussions and understood contractor relationships. Enlisted personnel respected him because he promised efficiency enhancements and accelerated supply deliveries. But I began observing issues almost immediately. Equipment would be documented as transferred to units that never requested it. Valuable items would vanish from secure storage and reappear weeks later under different accounting classifications. When I raised questions, Rusk would smile and explain he was optimizing processes and eliminating redundancies. The critical moment arrived when I cross-referenced our inventory reports with actual unit requirements. We'd shipped 20 night vision goggle sets to a Somalia forward base that never submitted requisitions. When I contacted the unit directly, their supply sergeant confirmed they'd never received night vision equipment. That's when I began constructing the complete picture. I started duplicating files, capturing screenshots, and documenting every discrepancy. I interviewed soldiers who'd handled shipments, verified manifests against delivery confirmations, and traced authorization codes to their origins. The pattern was clear. Rusk was directing equipment to private contractors operating regionally. The night before confronting him, sleep eluded me. I contemplated my field soldiers, those who trusted their equipment would function when most needed. I thought about my father, who'd taught me a man's reputation depended on his integrity, and my mother, who'd emphasized that moral behavior wasn't about recognition. I submitted my classified report at 0300 hours. By 0600, I was entering Rusk's office with my summary. 24 hours after Rusk dismissed my report, I received official discharge documentation. I sat in my quarters reviewing the accusations, conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer and insubordination toward a superior officer. The paperwork cited my inability to adapt to evolving operational requirements and persistent questioning of command decisions that undermined unit cohesion. Nothing mentioned the missing equipment. Nothing referenced my report. It was as though the office conversation never occurred. Specialist Rodriguez knocked on my door. "Sergeant Mitchell, the colonel requests your presence." I returned to his office, anticipating the outcome. Rusk sat behind his desk with Base Commander Colonel Patricia Hayes and the unit's legal officer. 3 sets of eyes observed my entrance. "Sergeant Mitchell," Colonel Hayes began, "your service record demonstrates commendable performance over 12 years. However, recent concerns about your adaptability to command structure have raised questions about your continued effectiveness in this unit. You're being discharged under Article 15 for conduct unbecoming. Processing will occur within 48 hours. I regarded Rusk. He met my gaze without hesitation, his expression calm and professional. Behind him, a framed photograph showed him greeting a Pentagon official at some ceremony I'd never heard of. "Do I possess the right to appeal this decision?" "You do," the legal officer responded. "However, given the circumstances and the need for unit stability, command recommends accepting the discharge and moving forward. Translation: fight this and we'll make it worse." I nodded. "Understood. You've served with honor, Sergeant," Colonel Hayes said. "This is unfortunate, but sometimes soldiers and commands aren't compatible." I saluted and departed. In the hallway, I passed the supply office where Rodriguez was updating inventory records. She looked up as I walked by, confusion evident on her face. She'd probably heard rumors already. Information traveled rapidly on a small base. Back in my quarters, I packed my equipment methodically. 12 years of service fit into 2 duffel bags and a footlocker. I folded my uniforms, wrapped my awards, and secured my personal items. Each piece felt heavier than it should have, but something had shifted inside me during that meeting. The anger remained, but underneath was something colder, more focused. Rusk believed he'd solved his problem by removing me. He thought eliminating the messenger would silence the message. He was incorrect. My classified report was already in the system, uploaded to servers beyond his reach. The Criminal Investigation Division didn't answer to logistics colonels or base commanders. They answered to federal law and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I'd followed procedures, documented everything, and trusted the process. Now I had to wait and see if the system I'd served for 12 years would protect the integrity I'd tried to maintain. The discharge process moved faster than anticipated. Within 12 hours, my security clearances were suspended. My access to logistics systems was terminated. Military police escorted me through the base to collect final paperwork, as if I might steal something during departure. Rodriguez caught up with me outside the administrative building. "Sergeant, what's happening? Nobody's explaining anything." "Orders change," I said. "You know how it is." She frowned. "This doesn't feel right. You've been our best logistics officer. The inventory's never been cleaner." I wanted to tell her to keep her head down, to avoid asking questions that might cause trouble. But she deserved better than that. "Just continue doing your job, Rodriguez. Document everything. Trust the process." She nodded, though I could see she didn't understand. How could she? From her perspective, a competent sergeant had suddenly been labeled insubordinate and sent home. The Army didn't usually explain itself to specialists. That afternoon, I sat in the passenger terminal waiting for my flight to Frankfurt, then Denver, then home to Montana. The base continued its operations around me. Aircraft landing and departing, convoys moving in and out, soldiers conducting their duties. Life moved forward as if I'd never been there. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Heard you're coming home. Everything okay?" I typed back, "Fine, just time for a change." The lie came easily. What else could I say? That I'd discovered my commanding officer was stealing millions in military equipment and selling it to private contractors? That the Army had discharged me rather than investigate the allegations? That 12 years of service had ended with an escort to the airport? A captain I didn't recognize sat down across from me in the terminal. "Sergeant Mitchell?" "Yes, sir." "Captain Williams, Criminal Investigation Division." He kept his voice low. "I understand you filed a report regarding inventory discrepancies." My pulse quickened. "Yes, sir. We've initiated a preliminary review based on your submission. The evidence you provided is comprehensive." He handed me a business card. Standard military contact information, but with a secure communication number. "What happens now?" "Now you go home. Let us handle the investigation." His expression was neutral, professional. "Sergeant, you did the right thing. Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than we expect." He left without another word. I sat in the terminal for another 2 hours watching planes take off and land, thinking about what Captain Williams had said. The investigation was moving forward. Rusk hadn't killed it by discharging me, but the cost was real. 12 years of military service ended not with a retirement ceremony or achievement recognition, but with an escort to the airport and questions about my character. My personnel file would forever show a discharge for conduct unbecoming. Future employers would see that notation and wonder what I'd done wrong. 3 weeks after returning to Billings, I received a call from Captain Williams. "Sergeant Mitchell, we need to talk. Can you meet me in Denver tomorrow?" "What's this about?" "Your report opened a bigger investigation than we initially expected. We've uncovered evidence of a systematic conspiracy involving multiple contractors and at least 6 military installations across 3 continents." I drove to Denver the next morning, my mind racing through possibilities. The Criminal Investigation Division offices were located in a nondescript federal building downtown. Williams met me in the lobby and escorted me to a secure conference room where 2 other investigators waited. "Sergeant Mitchell, this is Agent Rebecca Foster from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service and Colonel James Mitchell from Army Criminal Investigation Command." Williams gestured to chairs around a polished table. "What we're about to discuss is classified." I sat down, waiting. Agent Foster opened a thick folder. "Your initial report identified $4.3 million in missing equipment from Camp Lemonnier. Our investigation has traced those items to a network of private military contractors operating across East Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe." She spread photographs across the table, night vision equipment, communication gear, and weapon accessories I recognized from our inventory. But these photos showed the equipment in different hands, different locations, different contexts. This gear was photographed at contractor facilities in Kenya, Saudi Arabia, and Poland, Colonel Mitchell explained. "We've identified the purchasing chain, military equipment stolen from official inventory, sold to intermediary companies, then resold to private contractors at significant markup. How much are we talking about? Conservatively, $47 million over the past 18 months, Williams said. Lieutenant Colonel Rusk was a key facilitator, but not the only one. We've identified similar operations at bases in Kuwait, Afghanistan, Germany, and South Korea. Agent Foster pulled out another set of documents. Rusk had connections to Graythorne Legal, a consulting firm that specializes in defense contracts. They brokered deals between military logistics officers and private contractors who needed equipment quickly without going through official procurement channels. The scope was staggering. I'd thought I was reporting one corrupt officer stealing from one base. Instead, I'd uncovered an international conspiracy that spanned multiple branches of the military and involved dozens of participants. What's Rusk's status? Still at Camp Lemonnier, still commanding the logistics section, Colonel Mitchell said. He doesn't know we're investigating him. We need to build an airtight case before we move. What about my discharge? Williams exchanged glances with the others. That's complicated. Your discharge was technically legal under military law. Rusk had the authority to remove you for insubordination. Fighting it would require proving that the insubordination charge was retaliatory, which would expose the ongoing investigation. So I stay discharged while you build your case? For now, yes. Agent Foster leaned forward. But there's something else. We want to offer you a position as a consultant on this investigation. Your knowledge of military logistics and inventory systems is exactly what we need to trace the full extent of the conspiracy. I studied their faces, serious, professional, committed to seeing this through. These were people who understood that integrity mattered, that soldiers in combat zones deserved equipment they could trust. What would that involve? Analyzing financial records, reviewing inventory systems at other installations, helping us understand how the theft mechanisms worked, Colonel Mitchell explained. It would be classified work, well compensated, and it would give you a chance to see this through to completion. Outside the conference room windows, Denver traffic moved through downtown streets. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that military equipment meant to protect American soldiers was being sold to the highest bidder. When do I start? The consulting work began immediately. Within a week, I was analyzing logistics records from 6 different military installations, looking for patterns similar to what I'd found at Camp Lemonnier. The Criminal Investigation Division set me up with a secure workspace in a federal building in Denver, complete with classified computer systems and direct communication lines to investigators across the globe. The deeper I dug, the more sophisticated the conspiracy became. Rusk and his associates had developed a system of falsified transfer orders, manipulated inventory counts, and fabricated combat loss reports that made stolen equipment disappear from official records. They'd been operating for at least 3 years, possibly longer. Agent Foster called me into her office after I'd been working for 2 weeks. We've made our first arrest. She handed me a classified briefing document. A logistics officer at Ramstein Air Base in Germany had been taken into custody for equipment theft. The arrest was based on financial records that showed unexplained deposits totaling over $200,000. How did you track the money? Your recommendation to analyze bank records from military personnel with access to high-value inventory. We cross-referenced unusual deposits with equipment shortages and found direct correlations. She smiled. Your logistics background is proving invaluable. The investigation accelerated over the following month. We identified 17 military personnel involved in the conspiracy, including 2 lieutenant colonels, 6 majors, and 9 non-commissioned officers. The network stretched from junior enlisted soldiers who falsified paperwork to senior officers who authorized fraudulent transfers. But Rusk remained untouched. He continued commanding the logistics section at Camp Lemonnier, unaware that his communications were being monitored and his financial records were under microscopic examination. Williams brought me surveillance photographs from Djibouti, Rusk meeting with civilian contractors at restaurants off base, Rusk transferring files to unmarked thumb drives, Rusk conducting conversations in his personal vehicle away from official monitoring. We need to time this perfectly, Williams explained. If we arrest him too early, we lose the opportunity to gather evidence on his higher-level contacts. If we wait too long, he might realize we're closing in and destroy evidence. What's the timeline? 2 weeks. We've identified a major equipment transfer scheduled for next month, night vision systems worth over $3 million, supposedly bound for a training facility in Kenya. We want to catch him in the act of authorizing the fraudulent transfer. I reviewed the operation plan: simultaneous arrests across multiple countries, coordinated seizure of financial records, and complete dismantling of the conspiracy network. The investigation I'd started with a single report had grown into one of the largest military corruption cases in decades. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. local time across 4 different time zones. I watched from the Criminal Investigation Division's Operations Center in Denver as reports came in from around the world. At Camp Lemonnier, military police entered Rusk's quarters and placed him under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and theft of government property. His computer was seized, his personal effects catalogued, and his security clearances immediately revoked. Simultaneously, federal agents raided the offices of Graythorne Legal in Washington, seizing servers and financial records. In Kenya, local authorities arrested 3 private contractors who'd been purchasing stolen military equipment. In Germany, Afghanistan, and South Korea, additional military personnel were taken into custody. Agent Foster stood beside me, watching the operation unfold on multiple screens. $47 million in stolen equipment, 17 military personnel involved, and a conspiracy that reached from junior enlisted soldiers to Pentagon contractors. Your report made all of this possible. On one screen, I watched footage from Camp Lemonnier as Rusk was escorted to a transport vehicle in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, less authoritative without his uniform and rank insignia, just a man who traded his honor for money and been caught doing it. Williams joined us at the observation station. The evidence is overwhelming: financial records, communication intercepts, witness testimony, and physical recovery of stolen equipment. The military prosecutors estimate conviction rates above 90% for all defendants. I thought about Specialist Rodriguez and the other soldiers still serving at Camp Lemonnier, still trusting that their equipment would be there when they needed it. The conspiracy was finished, but rebuilding trust would take time. 3 months later, I received an offer I hadn't expected. Colonel Mitchell called me into his office at the federal building. "John, we've been impressed with your work on this investigation. Your ability to analyze complex logistics systems and identify fraud patterns is exactly what we need for future operations." He handed me a formal job offer from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, senior analyst position based in Denver with a focus on military supply chain security and fraud prevention. "We want you to help us build better systems," he explained. "Protocols that make it harder for future conspiracies to develop, training programs for logistics officers, and rapid response capabilities for investigating equipment theft." I studied the offer letter: good salary, federal benefits, and the opportunity to protect the integrity of military supply chains. The work would be challenging, important, and directly connected to soldier safety. "There's one other thing," Colonel Mitchell added. "The Army is reviewing your discharge. Given the circumstances and the value of your service to this investigation, there's a strong possibility your personnel record will be corrected." I thought about my dad, still working construction in Billings, still believing that a man's word was his bond. I thought about my mom, who taught me that doing your best was all anyone could ask. They'd be proud of how this ended, even if they never learned the full story. Outside the office windows, Denver stretched toward the mountains. Somewhere out there, soldiers were loading equipment for deployment, trusting that their gear would work when they needed it most. The conspiracy was finished, but the work of protecting that trust continued. I signed the offer letter. 2 weeks later, I started my new position, building the systems that would prevent future corruption. The work was important, challenging, and exactly what I'd trained for during 12 years of military service. The discharge still bothered me sometimes, but I'd learned that integrity wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the right thing, even when it cost more than you expected to pay.